What's the most horrific thing you found out about your ex after the breakup? I still remember the way my heart pounded against my ribcage the night I realized I had never truly known Andrew at all. Even now, thinking back to that moment, I get a chill up my spine. It was just me on the floor of my tiny bedroom, phone trembling in my hand, rereading the messages I'd received about him over and over, refusing to believe how dark his secrets actually were. For a long minute, I thought it must have been a prank or a cruel joke. But deep down, I already knew these revelations made sense. More sense than I wanted them to. And the worst part was, we had already broken up by then, but I still had no idea who the man I'd lived with for 3 years really was. Maybe I should start from the beginning, when everything between Andrew and me felt like a whirlwind romance and the idea of happily ever after made me giddy, like I was some high school kid dreaming about eternal love. I was 23 when I met him, a recent college graduate struggling to find my place in the world. My friends joked that I was too eager for a serious relationship, always looking for the one in random people I'd pass on the street. But that was just my nature. I grew up with parents who'd been married for decades, and a part of me believed that if I just tried hard enough, I could replicate their fairy tale. Andrew came into my life at exactly the right time. I was waitressing at a small cafe in downtown Denver, saving money while I tried to land a job that fit my degree in communications. It was a busy Saturday afternoon when he strode in, a tall, confident guy with an easy smile and the kind of demeanor that, from the first glance, made you believe he had his life together. I remember he was wearing a crisp button-down shirt and dark jeans, and he seemed so calm in the chaos of that bustling cafe. When I took his order, he looked up at me and grinned in a way that lit up his entire face. That moment stuck in my mind. He asked for a black coffee and a slice of chocolate cake. Simple. Then he made some joke about how he needed the sugar rush to finish his weekend errands. I laughed. One of those unexpected bursts of laughter that slips out before you can control it. I'd been on my feet for hours and was juggling multiple tables, but his presence made me pause. There was just something about him that felt comforting. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular at the cafe. At first, I thought he might have been trying to flirt, but as time went on, it just seemed like he enjoyed sitting there with his laptop, sipping coffee, occasionally chatting with me or my coworker Megan. He always left generous tips and he always smiled. One evening, I was finishing my shift, wiping down tables when Andrew asked if he could walk me home. I hesitated. My parents taught me to be careful about strangers, but he wasn't entirely a stranger by then. I'd seen him almost daily for a month, and he never gave off any creepy vibes. In fact, I felt safer with him around than I did trekking home alone in the dark. We walked slowly, the summer breeze rustling the leaves overhead, and that was the first time we had a real conversation about life. He told me he was from Chicago originally, moved to Denver to explore job opportunities in tech sales. He seemed passionate about it, describing the new app his company was selling and how he believed it could revolutionize small businesses. He talked about how his parents' small hardware store had folded because they couldn't keep up with online competition, and that was what inspired him to help businesses adapt. It all sounded so earnest. We reached my tiny apartment, and I remember feeling this flutter of excitement in my stomach. I wanted him to ask me out, but I also wanted to keep my cool. Instead, he asked if I'd like to get dinner sometime, and my heart soared. I nodded too quickly, probably, but I didn't care. That was the beginning. Andrew and I started dating, and it didn't take long for me to fall for him. He was attentive, always texting to see how my day was going. He'd ask about my plans, my interviews, my dreams. He acted genuinely interested, which felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the shallow interactions I'd had with guys my age who mostly wanted a good time and nothing more. Andrew was different, so I thought. After a couple of months, I introduced him to my best friend, Rebecca. We met at a sushi restaurant, and I was nervous because Rebecca has a strong intuition about people. She's the kind of friend who can see red flags a mile away, the one who told me that my ex from college had narcissist potential before I even suspected anything. But with Andrew, she only offered mild caution. She noticed he dodged certain questions, especially about his past relationships. When she asked how long he'd been single before meeting, Andrew muttered something about a messy breakup a few years ago and quickly changed the topic, praising the sushi like it was the best in town. Rebecca gave me a look, a subtle one, but I brushed it off as her usual overprotectiveness. At the time, I reasoned that maybe Andrew had some heartbreak he didn't want to talk about yet. Everyone has baggage, right? That's what I told myself. In the early months, Andrew's behavior was almost too perfect. He'd surprise me with sweet gestures, flowers delivered to my work, thoughtful little gifts like a new book from my favorite author, or a hand-knit scarf when the weather started getting cold. It felt like a whirlwind romance. I'd see couples in movies do these grand gestures, and I'd think, wow, Andrew does that for me in real life. Yet, there were small moments that seemed off. For instance, whenever I tried to take pictures of us together, he'd turn away or say he wasn't looking his best. One time, I snapped a quick photo at a park and he insisted I delete it. He told me he hated how he looked in pictures, that he preferred living in the moment. I found it a bit odd but also sort of charming, like he was one of those guys who didn't crave social media validation. Then came the first real red flag. It was about 4 months into our relationship on a chilly October evening. We were at his apartment. He had a nicer place than mine, so we often hung out there. And he left his laptop open while he went to take a phone call in the other room. I glanced over and I couldn't help but notice the name Cassie in an email subject line. The preview showed something like, "Still waiting on the funds," and my stomach twisted. Funds for what? Why would someone be emailing him about money? Before I could read more, he came back, and I quickly pretended I was checking my phone. I asked who Cassie was in a casual tone, and he stiffened. Then he forced a laugh, saying Cassie was just an old friend helping him out with a business investment. When I pressed for details, he shut me down gently, calling it confidential work stuff. I felt a pang of worry, but I told myself not to pry. Maybe I was just paranoid. Our relationship progressed. I lost my waitressing job around the holidays because the cafe cut back on staff, and Andrew graciously helped me cover a month's rent. He insisted it was no big deal, that we were a team. I was grateful, though a little embarrassed. He was making solid money, I assumed, so I accepted. I started to notice Andrew's mood swings in the new year. He'd come home from work looking exhausted and distant, pacing around his apartment, checking his phone incessantly. Some evenings, he'd be his usual charming self, cooking us dinner, playing board games, making me laugh until my sides hurt. Other nights, he'd lock himself in his home office for hours, emerging only to give me a kiss on the forehead and say he had to go to bed early. I tried to be supportive. I'd ask if there was anything I could do, but he just said work was stressful. Then, one late night, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I answered hesitantly, and a woman's voice asked, "Is Andrew with you?" Her tone was urgent, almost frantic. My brain short-circuited. I said he wasn't, and before I could ask who she was, she hung up. I told Andrew about it the next day. He shrugged it off, claiming it must have been a wrong number or maybe a persistent telemarketer. But I'd heard that woman's desperation. That was no telemarketer. I wish I had pressed harder, but I let it slide. I didn't want to be the paranoid girlfriend. A few weeks later, Andrew proposed we move in together. He said it would be cheaper for both of us if we shared rent, and I agreed, thinking it was a natural step forward. We found a cozy one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood near the foothills. I was overjoyed, imagining the bright future of living together, cooking breakfasts, waking up to each other's smiles. When we moved in, he insisted on hiring a moving company for most of his boxes, which seemed overly cautious. "I don't want you straining yourself," he joked. But on moving day, I found him hurriedly shoving items from a locked drawer into an unmarked box. He looked up and froze like a deer in headlights. When I asked what was in there, he blurted out it was personal documents. The tension in his voice was impossible to ignore. That night, as I looked around our new place, I felt a nagging unease. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. This was a new chapter. We had a fresh start in a cute apartment, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and the promise of building a life together. Andrew made me breakfast in bed, kissing my nose and telling me how happy he was that we'd taken this step. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world. For a while, the move-in went smoothly. We had fun nights where we cuddled on the couch, binge-watching shows, or had friends over for dinner. But within 2 months, the cracks deepened. I started noticing Andrew would disappear for entire weekends, claiming he had to travel for business. He wouldn't share exact details, just that it was top-secret client stuff. When I pestered him for more info, he said he couldn't break confidentiality agreements. If I asked about the nature of his job, he'd switch the topic or distract me with sweet gestures. Sometimes he'd come back with bruises on his arms or a cut on his lip, which he dismissed as work accidents. I couldn't imagine how a tech sales job could lead to such injuries. One day, Rebecca came over while Andrew was away and we decided to do a mini housewarming. We opened a bottle of wine, laughed, played music, and eventually started rummaging through the closet in the hallway, looking for extra blankets. While digging around, I found a box labeled kitchen stuff, but it was oddly heavy. Curious and slightly tipsy, I opened it. Inside were stacks of documents with names, addresses, and receipts. Some were spreadsheets. Others looked like bank statements from accounts I'd never heard of. The amounts in these accounts were astronomical, and they were under different names. Rebecca and I exchanged looks of alarm. We knew we shouldn't be snooping, but something about these papers felt criminal, like Andrew was dealing with other people's money, maybe without their knowledge. Part of me wanted to pretend I never saw it, but when you see something like that, you can't unsee it. I snapped a few photos on my phone, telling myself I'd ask Andrew about them later. That evening, before he returned, I sent him a text. Hey, can we talk about something important when you get home? He didn't respond for hours. When he did, he just wrote, sure. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he walked through the door and found me sitting in the living room, the open box of documents on the coffee table. He went pale. He closed the door and stood there for a moment, not saying a word. Finally, he murmured something about them being part of a side investment project. Hush, hush, and that I was overstepping by going through his things. I argued that this was our home. There shouldn't be secrets like this, especially if it involved large sums of money. Then, in a flash, he got angry. Angrier than I'd ever seen. He snatched the documents, shoved them back into the box, and told me never to go through his stuff again. His voice was cold, clipped. It scared me, but I tried to hold my ground, telling him I deserved an explanation if this was going to affect me. He stormed off, slamming the bedroom door. The next few days were tense. He oscillated between apologizing for his outburst and accusing me of being nosy. We didn't solve anything. He said that if I truly loved him, I'd trust him. And because I was so blinded by the idea of not losing this relationship, I told myself to drop it. Then came the final straw that led to our breakup. I discovered text messages on his phone from an unsaved number while he was showering. I couldn't help it. I was suspicious. The messages made my blood run cold. When are you sending the next payment? You're late again? My patience is wearing thin, Andrew. One even mentioned something about not wanting to get physical. It sounded like blackmail. My hands shook as I scrolled through the chat. The person on the other end threatened to expose Andrew if he didn't comply. Expose him for what? I couldn't read more because the shower turned off. I quietly placed the phone back, heart hammering in my chest. Later that night, as he slept, I lay awake, reevaluating everything. Who was this man lying next to me? Why did he seem to be entangled in something that sounded like extortion? The next morning, I confronted him. I told him I'd seen the messages and demanded the truth. First, he was outraged that I'd invaded his privacy. Then he calmed down and fed me a story about a disgruntled former business partner who was harassing him for money that wasn't rightfully theirs. He insisted he was the victim. But the more I pressed, the more his story crumbled. Eventually, he lashed out. He yelled that I was trying to sabotage him, that I had no idea how complicated his life was. In a blind fit of anger, I told him I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live with a man who hid everything from me, who might be involved in illegal activities. That was the end, or so I thought. We broke up that day, shouting accusations at each other. I packed a suitcase and left, moving in temporarily with Rebecca until I could get back on my feet. He sent me a few texts over the next week, half apologizing, half blaming me, but then he disappeared. I tried to move on, even though it felt like my world had been ripped apart. For weeks, I battled a confusing mix of emotions: grief, anger, relief. Part of me wanted to believe Andrew was just misunderstood, that maybe I'd been too harsh. Then, one afternoon, I got a Facebook message from a woman named Samantha Miller. Her profile picture showed a blonde woman in her 30s, smiling sweetly. She wrote, "Hi, I'm trying to reach Sarah. I got your info from a friend of a friend. It's about Andrew. Please respond." My heart leapt. I replied cautiously, asking who she was. What she told me shattered every illusion I had. Samantha claimed Andrew had been involved in multiple fraudulent schemes. She had been one of his clients. He'd convinced her to invest in a fake business venture, promising huge returns. Over 6 months, he'd extracted nearly $50,000 from her, only to vanish once she demanded her money back. She warned me that he had multiple identities and had done this to other women. Some he'd dated, some he'd just befriended. When Samantha found out he was dating me, from a mutual acquaintance who recognized his photo, she tried to locate me to warn me before I got scammed too, but never managed to connect. That phone call I'd gotten months ago? Likely someone else he'd wronged. My stomach churned. Could Andrew really have been a con artist all along? Samantha invited me to a private online group with other victims. I joined, feeling sick to my core. The stories were horrifyingly similar. Andrew, or sometimes Drew or Andy, would charm them, gain their trust, then either scam them out of money or trick them into unknowingly putting funds into illegal ventures. Some women discovered their identities had been used to open fraudulent accounts. One woman even said Andrew convinced her to marry him in Vegas, only to forge her signature on mortgage documents before vanishing. As I scrolled through post after post, tears streamed down my face. I remembered all the times Andrew had asked me to sign little papers claiming they were rental agreements or insurance documents. I felt sick. Had he used me too? I called Rebecca and told her everything. She urged me to check my credit report and bank statements. So I did. Sure enough, there were 2 credit cards in my name I'd never applied for. Both had large balances. One was in collections. In that moment, I realized I was yet another one of Andrew's victims. I stared at my own name next to thousands of dollars of debt I never racked up. I was in disbelief, a mixture of rage and devastation washing over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to find him and claw the truth out of him. I could barely sleep that night, imagining him out there, probably lining up his next victim. Over the following weeks, I began piecing things together with Samantha and the group. We shared screenshots, receipts, emails, anything we had. I found out Andrew had at least 4 aliases. He had addresses in multiple states, and he used a sophisticated method of forging signatures. To make matters worse, I stumbled upon evidence linking him to what looked like money laundering. There were wire transfers from foreign accounts. The sheer scale of his operation was mind-boggling, but the absolute worst part wasn't the money. It was discovering that the Andrew I thought I loved was a complete fabrication. Every memory, every tender moment, every whispered "I love you" felt tainted, like it had been weaponized against. He had studied me, learned my weaknesses, and used them to keep me close. Yet, in all the heartbreak, I felt a flicker of relief. At least I was no longer in direct contact with him. But that changed when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and I picked up to hear Andrew's voice. My blood ran cold. He sounded calm, almost casual, asking how I was as if we were old friends catching up. I demanded answers. He laughed. He told me it was all a misunderstanding, that I shouldn't believe everything I heard online. He claimed Samantha was a bitter ex trying to sabotage. He then made a veiled threat about how exposing him could lead to unpleasant consequences for me. I hung up shaking, my mind spinning. The next morning, a black SUV was parked outside Rebecca's place. It might have been coincidence, but paranoia gripped me. I was so afraid that Andrew, or someone working with him, was going to make good on those threats. I started looking into legal recourse. I visited a lawyer, handed over the documents and screenshots. They informed me that this was a complex interstate fraud case and recommended I contact the authorities. So I did. The police took my statement, but the wheels of justice turned slowly. Meanwhile, Samantha and the others were already in a legal battle, trying to gather enough evidence to bring Andrew down. Over time, more victims appeared, sharing the same heartbreaking story. Someone who appeared to be the perfect partner or friend, but who was actually orchestrating financial scams behind the scenes. Then I got an email from a detective in Chicago who had been investigating Andrew under another name. She wanted me to give a formal deposition. I flew there, nervous, scared, but also determined to see this through. The detective grilled me about dates, transactions, anything I remember. When I showed her the photos of the documents I had taken in the hallway closet, she said they matched leads from other cases. It was horrifying to realize how far his criminal web extended. On the flight back, I was a mess of emotions. Part of me still couldn't reconcile the man I knew, the one who held me while I cried about my job troubles, the one who told me stories about his childhood dog, the one who gave me a necklace on our first anniversary with the cold-hearted fraudster who ruined countless lives. But the evidence was undeniable. I found out through Samantha that Andrew had fled. Nobody knew exactly where he went. Rumors said he might be in Florida or even overseas. The cops had a warrant for his arrest, but he was slippery, always a step ahead. Meanwhile, the debt under my name was a real and pressing problem. I spent months disputing charges, working with lawyers, trying to clear my record. It was exhausting. Every day, I'd open the mailbox or my email, dreading another letter from a collection agency or another piece of news about him. One night, I broke down in tears on Rebecca's couch, telling her I felt like the biggest fool on the planet. She hugged me and reassured me it wasn't my fault, that con artists are experts at manipulation. But guilt gnawed at me. How could I have missed all the warning signs? How could I have ignored those pangs of doubt? In time, I started therapy. It helped me deal with the trauma, the betrayal, the nightmares. I began to realize that I wasn't alone. So many victims blame themselves. The truth is, I loved a phantom, a carefully constructed persona designed to exploit me. And for a long while, that left me feeling hollow, like every good memory was just a part of a con. Then, a few months after the investigation got serious, I received a call from the detective in Chicago. They'd arrested someone matching Andrew's description in Miami. He'd been caught trying to board a plane to Brazil under a fake name. My heart leapt, but I also felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. If he was in custody, I might have to testify against him in court. And I did. The day I stood in front of him in that courtroom, I hardly recognized him. He was thinner, paler, and his once confident posture was slumped. Gone was the charming smile I'd fallen. Instead, he glared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I testified about the credit cards, the documents, the suspicious phone calls. Samantha and several other victims testified too. My voice shook at first, but then a surge of anger took over. and I spoke with all the passion and pain that had built up over those months. Andrew tried to defend himself, painting us as disgruntled individuals out for revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty on multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. I watched as the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, and I felt a wave of emotion so powerful I almost collapsed. It was justice, but it didn't undo the damage. Over the next year, I worked hard to rebuild my life. Gradually, I paid off what I could, settled with creditors, and repaired my credit score. I started volunteering with a group that supported victims of financial abuse, sharing my story so others wouldn't fall into the same trap. Therapy helped me find closure, but the scars remained. Even simple things like trusting a new friend or opening a joint bank account with a future partner now came with a wave of anxiety. I guess the most horrific realization about Andrew, the one that still makes me shiver, wasn't just that he was a criminal. It was how easily he made me believe the lie of who he was. He knew exactly how to twist reality so I'd see a hero instead of a villain. For a long time, I had nightmares about him standing at the foot of my bed, smiling, telling me everything was okay while his eyes glowed with malice. I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, heart racing. Slowly, those nightmares faded, replaced by a sober acceptance of what happened. I moved to a different city, got a stable job in communications, and surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me. I learned to spot red flags and trust my instincts. I learned that love should never feel like walking on eggshells or unraveling a labyrinth of lies. Sometimes people ask me if I still feel anger toward Andrew. The truth is I do, but it's less fiery now. It's a quiet anger mixed with pity.